Jim Boswell, VP of Finance at FullSpeed Automotive. Jim, welcome. And the stage is yours, and it's all about driver-based modeling as the basis for flexible and dynamic FP&A.
Well, thank you again, Larissa, for having me. And let's just go ahead and dive right in. The first thing that I wanted to do is just kind of level set on what I see as really the most important aspect of driver-based modeling. So we all know that it is, deconstructing our business model into these discrete components in order to help us forecast the business. But I think number two there is what I want to hit on really quickly is the components or the drivers are then communicated to the managers or operators of the business and monitored routinely. So this takes driver-based modeling to the level where it is operationalized, and we can communicate through drivers to our operations managers exactly what levers they can pull to drive the financials that are subsequently constructed. So on the next slide, I just want to just quickly set the stage is that driver-based modeling is a journey when you do it right. And I have distilled into 7 best practices what I've seen over my years in financial planning and analysis, and want to get started with that. And the first on the next slide, the first piece of the puzzle is just to start now. We have a really flexible tool in Excel, and it doesn't matter where you are on the journey. You could be a company that didn't have a driver-based model at all. You could be hybrid. You could be fully integrated and already have an FP&A solution. But anytime you're tinkering with thoughts or thinking about adding a new module to that solution, you always want to start in Excel, where you can run sensitivity analysis and really have the flexibility to understand what will happen when you do implement that in a little more formal situation. And the next one is you want to frame up the situation. So from the start, there are some things that we always want to keep in mind, and one of those is three-way modeling. So if there is a change in an operating expense, you would want to see that flow through the balance sheet, maybe as accounts payable, and then subsequently hit the cash flow statement as a change in working capital. So always important as you build the model to keep in mind that you want it to be fully integrated, and it's easy to do that in Excel. The other thing is to build comprehensive inputs and controls. A lot of people like to call these global assumptions. So if you could back up just one, a lot of people call these global assumptions, and those inputs and controls should be really set up in a scenario type situation. So a base case, a bull case, and a bear case. And these might include things like growth rate, inflation rate, wage rate, exchange rate, all the things that you will need to tweak at the global level and then flow through the rest of the model. A couple times I've been tripped up by not using the smallest increment of time that was needed. Sometimes you'll start modeling at the monthly level, and really the business calls for a daily or a weekly look at the drivers that you're trying to operationalize. So don't make the mistake of starting at too high of a level on the time hierarchy. And then lastly, just the flow of how you should model. You should always start with the income statement, with the sales forecast, and then build your cost of goods sold. That's going to flow into your balance sheet as AR and AP, and again, it will finally result in the changes of the balance sheet showing up on the statement of cash flows. And then the next piece of this that I want to talk about is making sure that you really dig in. So as we advance, you'll see that my example here is COGS, and what you have here is sales volume, which is coming from another forecast, and then product cost, and that product cost is driven by the end of the year cost of that particular good, and maybe 3 or 4, maybe more economic forecasts in particular. One example that I have of this is when I was working at a $7 billion restaurant company. We would do this every year with all of our commodities, especially with the protein commodities. So for example, with beef, we would purchase economic forecasts from outside vendors. We would use other open source or government forecasts, and we would look at those in a data table and run sensitivity analyses, because what we found was that over time, period to period, some of those forecasts really changed the total product cost significantly. And so the overall determination was to blend a few of those indices and essentially create a smoother forecast. And then we also used the low and the high for our bull case and our bear case scenarios, so we still had scenario analysis that we could kind of look at. So it's important that you dig down as deep as you need to dig to find what those drivers are, and then really explore those drivers as well. But next, you also want to strike a balance. So as you look at these quotes that Larissa laid out, you could see that I'm kind of in line with her. I always tell analysts that we need to be as simple as we can, but as complicated as we have to be. What we're looking for is the explanation. 80% of what drives a certain P&L line item or balance sheet item. That's ultimately what we're trying to capture. And an example of this, one of the really hot topics is what are hidden drivers, or drivers that you don't necessarily know that are out there. We had an economist on staff at a company I was working for, and we tasked him with helping us understand, bottom line, what drove profitability more, what variables drove profitability. And one way we found some of those hidden variables was literally to turn every rock over. So we pulled data from the HRIS system, from the real estate system, from accounting systems, all the way down to the invoice level. And then we laid each of those variables out and ran a variable analysis on those. And or variance analysis and correlation analysis on those. And what we found, oddly enough, was this was a retail operation, that the proximity, so from the HRS data, we knew how far away the manager lived from the location, and that distance, the shorter the distance, the better the performance of that particular unit. So it was quite interesting to find that hiring managers maybe closer to, or locating them closer to the unit, would actually drive better performance. So that's an example of some of the analysis that you might want to do. And then next, don't be afraid to take the base layer that you have. So you might have a base trend or time series of data, say hours worked, and then you might have holidays where you need to layer on additional hours, or marketing promotions where you need to layer on additional labor hours that might be needed to support those things. But don't feel like you need to have a P times V type of mentality. You can always use a trend and new news to build up one of your drivers. And then now that you have all this information, the next piece of the pie is to use that deeper explanation that you have, and use that to explain to operations how they can move the business, how they can move sales, how they can move cost of goods sold. For instance, why are my cost of goods sold higher? If you just say, hey, your cost of goods sold are higher this month, that doesn't explain much. If you say, well, the price was down 3 cents on that particular cost of goods sold, but we saw that your volume was up 1,000 pounds, so that's where you're seeing the variance. Those are the type of explanations that you should be providing once you have a model that it can fully explain your business. And lastly, and we'll talk more about this throughout the process, but you're going to want to install a software solution. That's what all of this leads up to. You're doing all of these best practices to lead up to the ultimate best practice, which is having a software solution in place with a database behind it that will allow you better version control, will allow you machine learning and AI, so they can predict trends before you even realize they're a trend. And then the pinnacle of all of that would be prescriptive analytics, which we're definitely moving towards as an industry, which says, hey, your labor has gone up by, or your cost of goods sold seem to be going up based on your drivers over the next 6 months by 20%. You should buy 11% more inventory now, or something like that. When the system can start telling you that, that's when we've really kind of reached driver-based or FP&A nirvana. Well, those are the 7 best practices I have, and now we'd like to open it up for a question from the audience.